Steve Carlton was one of the greatest power pitchers of all time. Armed with a blazing fastball and wicked slider, Carlton is one of only 2 pitchers ever to strike out more than 4,000 batters. He was also a winner. During his career, Steve posted 329 victories, which ranks second on the all-time list among left-handed pitchers.
Steve, throughout your career, you were known predominantly as a power pitcher, relying on the fastball, curveball, and slider. I think most people feel as though that overpowering slider is really what made you the dominant pitcher you were during the 70s and 80s.
The slider was probably my best pitch, but you know, I set it up with you know, with a pretty good fastball. I don't think I was as powerful as you know, Nolan Ryan or Clemens or Gooden, the guys that throw in the middle to high 90s, but I always had great control with my fastball. I always worked the corners very well, and my slider would come out of the same slot as my fastball, and it would give the appearance, because the spin was so tight, of the fastball until at the end when it would dive out of the strike zone. I get a lot of check swing, you know, strikes like that.
What made the slider so good besides it coming out of the same spot and the spin being the same, or it looking like it was the same pitch? What made that slider so devastating, especially to right-hand hitters?
Well, I think what made it so tough is it gave the appearance of the fastball, which generally I would keep away from the hitter, so he'd be diving in to hit what he thought was a fastball. Then as he would dive, that pitch would be bearing in on him, and it would always be sort of out of the strike zone. I had a slot that I threw it for a strike when I needed it, and I had a slot that I threw it that would generally be a ball. So, you know, when you're heading the count, you're always throwing that ball out of the strike zone and get them to offer it.
Steve Carlton's professional baseball career first took root in 1964, when this tall and lanky pitcher from Miami, Florida, joined the St. Louis Cardinals organization. After just 1 year in the minors, this hard-throwing southpaw joined the big league club. The team's ace at the time was Bob Gibson, one of the premier power pitchers in the National League. Gibson led the Cardinals to 3 World Series appearances during the 60s, and in 3 fall classics, he set a record by winning 7 straight games.
Pitching with the great Bob Gibson, Hall of Famer, how much did you learn from him?
A lot. He was, I think, the ultimate competitor. I think everybody that's going to be a starting pitcher should posture themselves after a guy like Gibson. He was intimidating. He was hard-nosed. He was dedicated to winning. He was a hard worker. He pitched quick. He never talked to opposing hitters, which I think is a flaw in a starting pitcher, because opposing hitters like to sort of feel comfortable around you, you know, so they always try to buddy up to you, and he would never talk to an opposing hitter. And that sort of unsettled the hitters, you know, so it got them to back off the plate. And he used everything mentally and emotionally and physically to help himself to win. I thought he was a master at it.
Did you ever talk to opposing hitters?
No, that's one thing I learned from Gibby. I never got around the batting cage, and you know, always walked way around. You know, when they were leaving the field or something, I walked down down and around, and because it unsettles hitters, and those are things you can use to your advantage to winning.
In 1967, Steve Carlton became a regular starter on the Cardinals staff, and that year he won 14 games and helped lead St. Louis to a National League pennant. Carlton soon added the slider to his repertoire, and the results were impressive. In 1969, he won 17 games, and in one game, he set a major league record when he struck out 19 batters. Two years later, in 1971, Carlton led the Cardinals staff with 20 wins, and it looked like Big Steve was about to become the team's main stopper. However, following that season, Carlton got into a contract squabble with Cardinals management, and St. Louis responded by trading Steve to the last-place Philadelphia Phillies.
That sort of devastated me. They called me up like 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning and woke me up and told me I was traded. My mind just started racing, because in those days, being traded was more of a negative concept than it is today. Now trading is very common in the game. When they traded you there, they thought you were no good or you're useless, or they were trying to get rid of you, you know. And I thought they tried to bury me, getting me into the Philadelphia organization, which was a last place ball club at the time. And I called Bing back after I thought about it. I said, can I change anything? Let's talk about salary, anything, because I didn't want to go. He said, it's too late. It's a done deal, So it really upset me.
Entering his first year with the Philadelphia Phillies, Steve Carlton was handed the role as the team's ace. What then followed would be one of the greatest individual pitching performances ever witnessed. In 1972, Steve Carlton played on one of the worst teams in baseball, the Philadelphia Phillies. Yet whenever Steve took the mound that year, the Phils were suddenly transformed into winners. Carlton was simply overpowering as he led the league in shutouts, earned run average, and wins. Steve was so dominant that at one point he won 15 straight games. Incredibly, by the end of the season, Carlton had won 27 games, nearly half of the team's total. Despite the Phillies' last-place finish, Steve Carlton was named the National League's Cy Young Award winner.
Steve, I can remember back then that you were the dominant force in the game of baseball. 27 victory, over 300 strikeouts. What made you so dominant that year?
I think mentally I was so locked in. Looking back on the season, I never made a bad pitch. I always would nip the corner. I never threw that fastball down the heart of the plate, and I could feel the pitch coming off my fingers. I could see where it was going to be in the strike zone, and I never really saw the hitter. But to me, it was like an advanced game of catch, and I would just see the ball reaching the catcher's mitt, which is, for a pitcher, it has to be more successful because you don't want to throw to the hitter, you want to throw by the hitter.
Steve's super performance in 1972 left fans expecting more of the same from this overpowering southpaw. However, during the next 3 seasons, Steve failed to match these high expectations, as his one-loss record dropped to an even .500. Although he was still the best pitcher on the Phillies staff, Carlton often received criticism from the print media and soon became disenchanted with all the negative press. In 1976, Carlton decided to stop granting interviews to anyone in the media, and suddenly he had gone from Super Steve to Silent Steve.
Steve, I don't think it's any secret to anybody that you really didn't get along with the media that well. You didn't really enjoy talking to them. What was it about the media that you didn't like?
Oh, boy. I personally had a lot of friends in the media. I just thought that at a point it became an obstacle that interfered with my performance on the field. So I decided, they could do a better job writing without my quotes, which they did. I thought they wrote much better after I stopped talking to them. But it was just, at the time I treated it as pretty much an obstacle. It was, mentally it was bothering me or interfering with my performance on the field. And from there on out, I thought, for a lot of reasons, and it made me work harder because, you open yourself up to be a target. So I worked harder to perform better, those types of things. And I thought they wrote a lot better.
In 1976, Steve Carlton was able to focus completely on the job at hand and had his best season since '72. He won 20 games, lost only 7, and helped the Phillies win their division. The next year, Steve led the majors with 23 wins, and the Philly fans once again were singing the praises of Super Steve. One of the elite pitchers in the game, Steve Carlton gathered much of his strength from his studies in Eastern philosophy, a form of thinking he followed throughout his career.
Steve, throughout your career, your main thrust was on positive thinking. Do you think that came from your reading about Eastern philosophy?
Yeah, I know it did. It sort of sets the tone for what you're going to carry and say into the game. And whatever dialogue you have in the clubhouse, and I was very much, doubtful if we're going to win. Geez, I hope we're going to win. Those were always doubtful words to me, and I always did my best to, to either block them out personally, but to train other people not to even have that type of dialogue. The doubtful dialogue. It takes a commitment to say you're going to win.
Based on his strong performance in 1977, Steve Carlton was once again named the National League Cy Young Award winner.